So with port, we are still in Portugal, except we're in mainland Portugal now. And ports can seem really, really confusing because there are so many labelling terms. So the key to understand it and the key to just be able to go, aha, that's what that's going to taste like, is to think of tawny port. Now you'll see regular tawny port, you'll see aged tawny port, 10 years, 20 years we've got here. And the key is tawny ports are ones that have been aged with oxygen. So again, you're back to your toffee, your chocolate, your caramel, your dried fruits and your dried nuts. Now, these are all made with indigenous grape varieties from Portugal. The one you may well heard most of is Touriga Nacional. These are really, really good grape varieties. You get red fruits and black fruits, but with the tawny ports, those caramelized flavors are the ones that really dominate and make a really, really delicious wine. Even tasted slightly chilled is a really nice way to have it. Now, all the other styles, I'll come back to white port in a second, but all the other styles are really to do with excluding oxygen from the maturing process. And that is done by putting it in a bottle, stoppering it, and then letting it mature in the bottle. So only a tiny amount of oxygen may go in through the cork, but nothing to speak of. And basically these type of wines are based on the black red fruits that I was speaking about. So a standard ruby port, you are getting stewed fruits maybe. You might get a bit into dried fruits when you get to reserve ruby, but really you're talking about stewed red and black fruits. Then you get into, and this is where it starts to get really confusing. This is a late bottled vintage, unfiltered. You get late bottled vintage port filtered. You get vintage ports. And the key, I suppose the top of the heap are the vintage ports, because not every year you will get a vintage. So it's only where it's a particularly good year, and and each individual producer decides if their plots have produced the best in that year, and therefore they say, right, 2005, this is a vintage. So these are the top ones. Now, what happens as these age without oxygen is you get much more savoury and earthy flavours. I have to say that was the reason I thought I didn't like port. So the other thing about ports is they are all sweet. And they tend to be the high end of the alcohol. So they're like 18, 19, often up to 22%. Now, what about white port? Now, these are made with, again, grapes of local grapes. They can be aged in oxygen or they can be unaged, in which case they're much more to do with the fruit flavours. So things like peach and those kind of flavours. But if it's aged, then you start to get things like dried fruits like sultanas. You might get some nuttiness, some almond. So they can actually be really delicious cocktail parts for a cocktail.